I am Brad Keelor. He is Tim Avery. Next up on Director's Cut, find out why business development is not a swear word.
When going out west where I belong, when the days are short and the nights are long, and I walk.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Director's Cut. My name is Brad Keelor. I'm the director of the Geo-Institute, and that is why we call this show Director's Cut. Every single week until I get fired, I sit down with a different member of the Geo-Institute who tells us stories about themselves. Some of them are personal, some are professional, but all of them, every single one, are fun. If you don't know anything about the Geo-Institute, after you watch this today, you should head over to geoinstitute.org, and there you will see that we are a technical society with about 12,000 members, most of whom are geotechnical engineers and or geologists, and that we are part of the American Society of Civil Engineers. Last thing, if you like what you see today, and I think you will, Tim is a funny guy, and he's going to put on a show for us. Click like, subscribe, get notifications, and we will let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel. So now that I've built him up and he has to deliver on the funny part especially, we are joined this week all the way from the left coast of America by senior business development manager, officer. Officer
you
sounds
name it.
Really official. At Keller, North America, it is Tim Avery. Tim, welcome.
Thank you, Brad. It's really good to be here. I'm terrified that I have to be funny or live up to these expectations, but I think regardless, it'll be a fun conversation.
Absolutely. We have 10 questions the same way that we do every week, and 2 of those are the same, and we start with one of those. Describe your job in 45 seconds.
Well, some of it entails doing things like this, is interviewing or being interviewed by people to talk about your job. The rest of it goes with developing work. So business development is everything from working with consultants to contractors to owners. A lot of times for us at Keller involves selling ground modification and concepts that people may not be that familiar with. And so a lot of what I do is teaching different ground modification methods, grouting, seismic work for stone columns, soil mixing, etc., things like that. And it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go through the interview today. Fun questions, staple of Director's Cut. We're going to hit you hard. The hard-hitting journalism that I like to say that we have on Director's Cut. What item do you always forget at the grocery store? Well,
that's pretty obvious. It's always the one you went there specifically for. And I always seem to go home with a bag of onions as a replacement. But, I think it's celery. I use it periodically in cooking, and when you need it, it's not there or it's gone limp, and you go to the store specifically for it and you forget. So I'm going to go with celery.
So we have a little bit of a cult following within the GI of our favorite cooks. And one of those is Matt Evans from Oregon State. And I have a feeling you're going to be high up here on the list in a moment. What's your favorite recipe that involves celery?
Probably beef stew. I mean, a nice hearty beef stew. You can't beat that.
And where are you? So everybody's got a different beef stew. So walk us through it. What's your favorite way to make it?
The classical way. So the thing with celery is you use a stick of celery, an onion, and a carrot. You make what's known as a mirepoix, and you saute that in olive oil or oil. And then you brown your beef, and you put that back all in the pan, and you add some sort of liquid. It could be red wine, it could be stock, it could be water, and you cook that for 3 to 4, 6 hours until the beef is tender, and you throw in some potatoes, and you've got a magnificent meal.
What beef do you favor for beef stew? Do you have a go-to, or do you change it up from time to time?
Just a chuck roast. Something.
Wow. So I tried one of the things that happened at our house during COVID is I started buying whole tenderloins
Oh,
and butchering them into fillets and the
sure.
roast and everything. And I was like, what am I going to do with the chain meat? Because it's not in big pieces.
Yeah.
There's not that much of it. So I realized 2 of those is the perfect amount for beef stew. And so we
Very nice.
started using that, and I feel like we can never go back. Nobody in our house is ever going to eat beef stew that wasn't made with tenderloin now.
Boy, you've really spoiled your family. I mean, that's literally, as they say, eating high off the hog or high off the cow.
Well, I figured, you can go buy the fillets at $28 a piece, or you can butcher them yourself from the tenderloin for less than half of that. So I figure,
Right.
why not go all out with the beef stew?
No, I'm going to try that.
It's pretty good, Tim. It melts in your mouth. If I
Yeah.
could do the chef kiss motion properly, I would
Yeah.
do that right now, but I can't.
We'll have to wait for another episode.
The third question that we ask is always the research or practice one. We're going to do something a little different today. So we mentioned at the top, you're in business development. A lot of people are like, ugh, sales, BD, but it's not really that way. It's a super important part of the engineering project lifecycle. Can you talk a little bit more about how you are involved with projects, maybe pick a couple and how you were involved, or why business development is not bad and how it is important to the project cycle period?
Well, those are about 6 hours worth of discussion.
We got time.
Yeah, business, let's face it, the root of this called sales has always had a bad name in technical stuff because it's got these, white-shoed used car salesman type connotations, and it isn't. We are selling every day, whether we're selling to our wife, our boss, our people who work to us, and we're basically laying something out in front of them that we want them to weigh these things and select what they want. And generally in sales, it means we're giving you opportunities to look at some of the products we have and you want to select some of them. But it's not necessarily the high pressure, twisting somebody's arm to make them go with you. That doesn't work well in this industry. So a lot of what we do is business development is we track projects, we talk with clients and talk with consultants. And a big part of what we do at Keller in business development is we work with the consultants, because consultant may have an issue and they've got a thing they want to put on the ground and the ground's bad, and how do we stabilize it? How do we do that? And so we might get involved, developing certain concepts and suggesting some things that might work, and possibly, it gets designed using, let's say, deep soil mixing or stone columns. And that's a lot of what our work is working directly with either the consultants, or sometimes the GCs will come to us and say, hey, we're looking to do some stuff. We've got some tricky foundation stuff. What do we need to do? And that's a lot of fun. A couple projects. I think one of the most fun project that I had was many years ago when it was called Hayward Baker. I was in touch with a developer up in Canada, and they had this huge plot of land they were going to put this massive, massive mall on. And they invited me up to a meeting with their consultant, and the consultant was talking about how we have these soft soils that we need to surcharge, and it's going to take a year to surcharge these things. And I said, well, have you heard of wick drains? And they said, no, what's that? And I said, well, these are something we can install in the ground that was going to really expedite your surcharge time. So instead of taking a year, it might only be 3 months. And, it was almost like I had, discovered fire or electricity or a light bulb. And it was actually one of the best projects we ever had doing wick drains. It was a massive project. We came into an area where people didn't know first thing about that, and it was very successful. And those are always fun when you have these light bulb moments with people where you can, make a big difference in the project. And let's face it, we did well, they did well, and everybody was happy.
Do you feel like you could do your job without being an engineer?
It certainly helps. I mean, could somebody off the street who just graduated high school or even college with a communication degree, and I'm not at all looking down on that. Could they do it? It would be difficult because, you have to, and what I was talking about, you had to understand clay, you had to understand consolidation.
Right.
You didn't have to be a PhD in it, but you had to know the mechanics of it and why it was an issue and what things could be done to fix it. So I would say you certainly need a background in it. A degree certainly helps.
I guess it probably makes it more rewarding too at that point. I mean, you mentioned a little bit about the feelings you had at the end of that project in Canada. I would think that would be a super rewarding part of the job. Is there anything else that you can think of that makes you absolutely love what you do?
Just the creative part of it, because there is no, especially, you're with the Geo-Institute. When I hear GI, I think ground improvement. And that's really a major aspect of what I do in the West Coast is ground improvement. It lends itself incredibly well for seismic issues, liquefaction. And it just is a lot of fun to go into places and have solutions where people are pulling their hair out thinking, how do we do this? And you almost feel like, God-like coming in and saying, well, we can do this or we can do that, and solving their problem. And it's like in a very elegant, technical way that makes everybody happy. And that aspect of this is very rewarding, very rewarding. And I also like it, I'm sort of like a teacher, and that I think is really my core love, if you will, is just teaching people.
I can go with GI standing for ground improvement. I'm glad you didn't go gastrointestinal or something like that. I mean, which there's
You're not over 50 yet, are you?
Large community of people out there that's probably what they think of. But
yeah,
right now it's Geo-Institute and it's ground.
Okay, I'll give you that one, Brad. I'll give you that one, Brad.
Another question I have never asked anybody, and so I had to put it in yours, and it sounds like it was a good question to ask. In your entire life, Tim, what is the loudest that you've ever yelled or screamed?
When you sent that to me, I was thinking I'm going to have to ask another one. And over time, something actually popped up that would address this, and it was actually screamed. This was before my voice changed. I was a little boy, 11 years old, and I was riding my bike down a hill, and I had to make a very sharp left turn, and I stuck my foot down, and apparently it got caught, and I spun around on that, and I did a spiral fracture of my femur, and I remember just lying there in the street, and it was not a very crowded place. It was, out in the sticks in Colorado, and there were a few houses here and there. And I just remember laying there and making noise, and suddenly people came from, it seemed like miles around, and surrounded me. It was 50 years ago that I broke my leg, but I believe that's probably the loudest I've ever been, certainly the shrillest.
And you said you didn't have any long-term complications from this at all, which is incredible.
Yeah, unless I hit my head, and then who knows? You guys are probably more aware of that than I was. I wasn't wearing a helmet at the time. Shame on me.
Send all comments about Tim's mental capacity to Geo-Institute.
Yeah, we can figure this out. We'll talk about airports, see how that goes.
Another question I absolutely had to put in here. A lot of people are probably watching this and saying to themselves, Tim doesn't have a mustache. You had an absolutely epic mustache. How did you decide to grow it? How long did you have it? And how did you decide to get rid of it?
So I think I started it in maybe 2009. I don't remember exactly when I grew it, but I remember having a goatee. And, I'm looking at myself, excuse me, in the camera, and the problem I had with the goatee is with my hair color and my skin color, they very much look alike. And I really just looked like I was out of focus. And I thought, well, I either need to wait for it to go all white, which I wasn't, anxious to, or maybe I need to have a different texture or outline. And so that's when I started to grow the mustache. So at least there would be something a little more prominent to, show off that I actually had facial hair. And so I grew that, and then I shaved it off a bit over a year ago. And it was all in anticipation of a dental appointment. I had developed an abscessed tooth, and I had one a year prior, and I just remember going to the dentist, and he kept grabbing my mustache inadvertently, but using it as a handlebar to move my lip. And so the second time when I had the abscess, I went home that day and shaved it off. So when I went to the dentist the next day, he was not going to be pulling and grabbing on it. And after I came back to work, people said I looked 10 years younger. So, I was thinking maybe I shaved my eyebrows. But I will say, in anticipation of this question, I thought, you know what? People have brought up my mustache quite a bit. We should take a survey. But I started growing it back Sunday. So stay tuned. Maybe in 8 weeks, we'll have the startings of the return of the mustache.
So I think I always will go, 5 or 6 days is about all I can take, and it drives me crazy. What was the daily maintenance like of the mustache? What did you have to do?
In the morning, it was just whatever breakfast I had somehow would end up in that, oatmeal, what have you. And you're always going like this. And part of it's just getting it out of your face or your mouth. And then, essentially I had some mustache wax, and I did not have a very coiffed mustache. It was more or less RAF pilot, where it's sort of brushed out on both sides. And so I didn't put a lot of wax in it, but I might put enough in it just to give it a little bit of hold and keep it from drooping. But it wasn't all that much.
So this is about as controversial a question as we ever ask on Director's Cut. It's the final mustache follow-up, I promise.
Okay.
So you said you had a goatee first, and then you went with the handlebar. Do you feel like the type of facial hair you have impacts your personality? Or it's just weird, right? Because you see these photos of these guys from 1910 with the handlebars, and you're like, oh, I know exactly what kind of personality they have. Or you see somebody with a goatee, and you're like, oh, well, this is what someone with a goatee does. Do you feel like that happens at all? And did it happen to you when you had the handlebars?
Well, I think what you're describing, and we're going to go off in a different realm here of psychology, but I think what you're describing is it's sort of like when you buy a red beetle. Suddenly you see red beetles all over. And so when you associate different personality traits to different facial hairs, I think it's only because perhaps when I had the handlebar mustache, it accentuated that in my personality that was handlebar mustachy. But I think it's whatever's there. And so people will find out whatever traits they have that go with their goatee and say, yeah, I could see him having one.
But it didn't change your behavior. You didn't start riding. What were those bikes called?
Penny
with the
farthing.
Giant front wheel. You didn't start riding a penny farthing to work.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I thought of it, or at least get a convertible and have the goggles and the cap and stuff like that.
I didn't think about that. That would have been excellent too.
And I'm kind of at the age where I could pull that off.
Tim, you can pull that off at any age if you're doing it right.
True. So
that is fantastic. So we'll all look forward to the possible return of the mustache. I feel like we broke some news here on Director's Cut this week. This is very exciting.
You heard it here first, folks.
The other question that we ask everybody when they come on the show is, how did you first get involved with ASCE and GI?
So my background, I as a kid fell in love with geology growing up in Colorado and going through the Rockies and whatnot. And I thought I wanted to be a geologist when I was young. And when we moved to Tucson and I started looking at course catalogs for colleges, somehow it opened to geological engineer. And I ended up going to mining college in Arizona studying geological engineering, which I was very, very happy to. It sort of added a lot of tangibles, and I had civil engineering. I had different types of engineering. So I had mining, I had civil, I had some geological courses or geological engineering specifically related to mining. And it was a lot of fun. And my senior year, some friends were taking a soils class, and they said, "This is really cool. The teacher's neat." And I thought, well, I've got time, and so I signed up for it and started taking soil mechanics. I agreed, it was really a neat class. And so, I added that to all of the stuff that I was learning. And then when I graduated in 1984, the Earth was still pretty warm back then. We were in the mining industry, there was no work to be had. So I stayed around and got a master's degree. And again, I focused a little bit more on geotechnical stuff. And when I graduated, I really went full force into geotechnical engineering work. And when I ended up working for Hayward Baker back earlier part of this century, as I mentioned earlier, a major part of what we do in the West Coast is ground improvement. Geo-Institute, they are hand in hand, and that's really how I got involved. I've been a lifelong member of ASCE since I was a young engineer. It was just recently when I was with Hayward Baker that I got involved with the Geo-Institute.
Well, we are thrilled to have you, and we will talk a little bit more about Arizona and about your geological engineering background later on. I threw this question in here, and for everybody younger than 40, this is probably not going to make any sense to them because this is not a thing you do anymore. But Tim, what is the best stereo system you've ever owned in your life? Can be a home one, a car one, or whatever.
Wow. I saw that, and I unfortunately, I with all of your questions, I got hooked on celery and breaking my leg, so I never gave that a lot of thought because I do like listening to music, but I've never been, an audiophile. So I'm just going to say I had a Toyota Camry that when I bought the Camry, it was a company car when I started with Hayward Baker, and I got the loaded Camry. So it had that Harman Kardon,
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, 18 speakers or something like this. And that was a darn good stereo. So I'm just going to say it was my Camry. Cars these days can have just amazing sound systems.
That's true. I guess that's the last vestige of the old killer sound systems because nobody really puts it in their living room so much anymore, or it's a lot less common at least.
That when you had the receiver, and then you had the reel-to-reel. If you were somebody else, you had the reel-to-reel recorder. That I never had that. I went from the 80s or 70s style where you had everything in one. So it had an 8-track cassette, it had the turntable, and then AM/FM radio.
My freshman year of college, my roommate and I had communicated before we went to school, but apparently we did not communicate about the stereo, so we both brought one. And he starts unloading his from the box, and I told my dad to go put ours back in the car because this thing was insane. I think this was in the mid 90s, and it was about 300 or 400 watts total, probably. We got the volume up to 8, and it went to 50, Tim. And
Holy mackerel.
at 8, the walls started to shake, and I was like, "This is the greatest thing ever."
Yeah, Party Central.
That was fantastic.
Well,
so we're going to talk.
Amazing that. It is amazing nowadays that the power of all these Apple products. And, I've got a little Sonos, just a tiny little speaker that I have in the kitchen, and it just gives an amazing sound. So,
and you can get access to whatever you want all the time. And that's what's crazy about it to me, I think. So we'll go back and talk a little bit about your time at Arizona now. I was curious, you talked a little bit about how you decided on geological engineering, but what was really different for you from a geotech degree in that? What did you learn that was different, and how was your experience different than it would have been if you had gone straight through civil and geotech?
Are you saying how my geological engineering degree is different?
Right.
I think part of it is when you're a geologist, Geology is trained on the origin of things. So perhaps we have a better, not we have, but you have perhaps a better understanding of, what clay is and where it comes from and how it's deposited versus silt versus sand versus cobbles. You understand the makeup of the earth and why, California is different from Arizona versus Utah, for example. Even though we're still dealing with the soil properties or the properties of we're founding our buildings on, it gives you a better understanding of why it's like it is in Phoenix versus Salt Lake.
That's pretty cool. Now, you also mentioned, though, and I think this is the case at a lot of institutions, geological engineering. Were you with the civil kids? Were you with the geology kids? Who were you primarily next to and around?
That's a great question, because we're sort of like involved in everything and part of nothing. It was the Mines College, and so I hung out with the geoengineering kids. We had a bunch of classes with the civil, so I took static, strengths, water, fluid, and a few other things with the civil guys. I took a bunch of geology with the geology people. We used to have a joke, and it's probably kind of crude to say, but when I was in college, there was the joke that what do the geologists call the geoengineers when they're going through school? And it was nerd. And then what do they call us when they graduate? Boss. The geological engineering, I think, was just a more focused profession to get into the geosciences or engineering. But no, we were very much mines. I mean, I had mine mapping courses. We had a school mine we went down to and went underground and mapped, and we went to open pit mines and did tours like this. So, and that was our geotechnical engineering. That was our exposure to geotech, was massive, mine tailings and slope stability of, open pit mines and things like that. So it was some pretty grand geotechnical issues.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And a good place to do it. A lot of land to do it on out there.
Land, and you could see it. It's not like Wisconsin or Illinois that it's all covered with grass or corn, And I like corn, so nothing against you people who grew up in cornfields.
We've got 2 questions left. They're both about Keller. I don't know how we planned this out. You left Hayward Baker. You mentioned earlier that you used to work for Hayward Baker, and you left them in 2012, and you came back to Keller in 2020. And it's when you come back like that, especially after an extended period of time, there's a lot that's different, but there are still things that are the same. For you, what was the hardest thing about returning? And then maybe what was the easiest about coming back?
Well, I don't think there was anything really hard about coming back. It was kind of neat. It was, a homecoming, if you will. I came back to a lot of the friends that I worked with. The differences were, we went from Hayward Baker, which was much smaller company, to Keller, which suddenly was I liken it to General Motors versus Chevrolet. Well, we're now General Motors, and that's all you get from us. And Cadillac and Corvette are all both under General Motors. So I came back to a much bigger organization where, having Bencor, we now, have diaphragm walls and some big things that we didn't have as Keller, and ground freezing through more trench. So I came back to a company with a lot more arrows in their quiver, and that was the exciting thing about it. I was coming back to a company that did everything we used to do and then some. So, the only thing I miss is I wish I had stayed, because I'd have the watch now.
Is it a Keller watch, or do you get to pick one from a catalog?
Oh, I think it's a Timex, that they give the blue and gold colors on and stuff. It's really a neat watch.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I said we had 2 Keller questions. Recently, GI and Keller started partnering on the Keller Seismic series. It's a series of lectures on the GI YouTube channel, 1 a month until September, I think, is when they're going to end.
August 19th, I think.
And these are really great. The first couple topics were excellent. Lecturers were excellent. Not that the remaining ones are not going to be either. I'm sure they will be. They just haven't happened yet.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, what was the inspiration for the Seismic series, and what were you guys trying to achieve with it?
Well, I've mentioned this before. Being in the West, every geotechnical report you see and that is written has got an issue of a seismic component of it, whether it's a real issue or not. And when I say real, whether there's liquefaction at site or something, everybody here is going to be hit by an earthquake. It just is a function of how the soil responds and the structure responds. Having been so involved in that for years, and this was really the brainchild of Miriam Smith, who's new with Keller as a business development executive in the West, we wanted to basically provide a vehicle for cutting edge research and people who are doing earthquake studies of one form or another. We wanted to give them sort of a level platform. They could discuss their work as well as share it with people such that, we kind of bring up the state of practice. So we offering these things in the seismic realm to increase everybody's knowledge and capacity for seismic work, specifically in the West, but certainly around the country. And you're right. And thank you, Brad. We had a great conversation about this at Geo-Congress. I'm really grateful that you guys have picked it up. Yes, I think the seminars are fantastic. We've got 4 left. The first 2 was Ziggy Lukowski from Arup in London, who talked about historical perspective and what we've learned from past earthquakes. We recently had Ramin Motamed from UNR talk about shake table testing and helical anchor usage for liquefaction. And then we've got, like I say, 4 more, and they're all incredibly great presenters and really interesting topics. So I'm excited about it, and I'm really excited that we can hold it with you guys.
The last one was a blast. You can watch it on our YouTube channel with Ramin Motamed from University of Nevada, Reno, as Tim mentioned. We've got the next one coming up on the 16th of this month with Armin Studeline from Oregon State University. They're all going to be fun, and they will all be available until the end of time, or I guess until Google and YouTube shut down, maybe. I don't know which is going to come first. I waffle in my head. Will the world end? Will Google shut down? Will the 2 events coincide? You just don't know.
Chat AI will take it all over.
So, Tim, you made it through all 10 questions. You did so with flying colors.
Excellent.
And this was a great interview, and thanks for doing this. And for our viewers, if you liked what you saw, and you're here at the end, so you probably did, click like, subscribe, get notifications, and of course, we will let you know with a loving email every time we post something to the GI YouTube channel. Tim, thanks again for doing this. This was a blast.
Thank you. I'll come prepared next time with some better jokes.
And maybe we'll do a time lapse of the mustache growing back. I think the people would like that.
I'll take one every week.
That would be fantastic. I feel like that would be a highlight. We'd put it up on the GI website. And for our viewers, thanks again for sticking around, and we will see you with a brand new Director's Cut next week.
And I shimmy, and it shimmy, and I fly, and it fly. We were out there having fun in the warm California sun. We were out there having fun in the warm California